com.
Let not your heart be troubled. Listen to me, Sean Hannity. I'll have the latest news and what it all means for you. It's coming up at 2 right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan, and in for Amy J., the Chicago Tribune's Page 2 columnist, John Cass. And, John, we talked about this a little bit earlier in the week. The announcement by Justin Amash over the weekend, Michigan congressman, that he was leaving the Republican Party.
We've had it with these two parties trying to ram their partisan nonsense down our throats week after week. We want a person to go represent us and be open and represent the entire community.
Are you running for re-election as an independent to Congress?
Yes, I am.
You are, and you think you can win as an independent?
Yes, I'm very confident about that.
What about the possibility of your running for president as a libertarian or some other ticket? I asked you about that 4 or 5 months ago, and you didn't rule it out. Is it possible you would run for president?
I still wouldn't rule anything like that out. I believe that I have to use my skills, my public influence where it serves the country best. And I believe I have to defend the Constitution in whichever way works best.
Okay, well, good luck with that. If you're, I doubt you'll get Gary Johnson numbers, even Justin Amash, but okay. But in the interim, he's planning on running for re-election to the House as an independent. This drew some reaction from his former colleagues, including Mia Love, who's not necessarily any sort of reflexive Trump supporter. She said this about Amash.
The administration demands 100% loyalty, and they won't give it back. And so that area I agree. But where he's actually leaving the party and thinks that he's actually going to be able to change the process from being one person in his own caucus speaking to himself, it's unrealistic to think that you're going to change anything. What you have to do is put yourself in uncomfortable situations, go and speak to people that you don't agree with, and see if you can have a dialogue that'll change other people's minds. You can't do that on your own.
Scott Jennings is a GOP flack, who's a CNN contributor. He's consults Mitch McConnell, among others, so he's more establishmentarian. He said this about Amash.
What a burden it must be to be the smartest person in a room full of 435 people. He says he went to the Freedom Caucus and tried to change things, and no one would listen. I went to my committee hearings, and no one would listen, and now I'm just going to leave everything. I didn't think it was possible for him to be more irrelevant in Congress, but he found a way. The reality is, with his voting record and his views on the president, he could not win a Republican primary in Michigan. This was not born out of principle. This is born out of political expediency, and he's going to run for re-election maybe, unless he runs for president. But the fact is, this guy has never been able to work with others. He's never affected change on behalf of his district. And to go and blame everybody else, to me, strikes me that the people of Michigan might want somebody else.
All right. For more on this topic, there has been very few rallying to Justin Amash's defense, generally speaking. He's also was the subject of an op-ed in the Washington Post by Henry Olson, suggesting that Amash is a man without a party because no party can win with his ideas. That's sort of intimating they're somewhat, dangerous or antiquated. Don Boudreaux is a professor of economics, and he is a chair for the study of free market capitalism at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. He's also a contributor to a favorite blog of mine, Cafe Hayek. He wrote in defense of Justin Amash and his antiquated, quote-unquote, ideas. And Don Boudreaux joins us now. Don, thanks for being with us again. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
So what about all of the heat Justin Amash is taking for his criticism of Trump, but, his general iconoclastic nature, I guess?
Well, look, it depends upon what your goals are. If your immediate goal is to pass legislation and to have an effect on legislation now, then leaving the Republican Party, leaving any of the two major parties, is probably not the way to go. I actually know Amash a little bit. I'm not a close friend of his, but contrary to what one of the people that you played said, I think he is a man of principle. And in this imperfect world of ours, we all have to weigh practicality against principle. It's unavoidable, particularly if you're in politics. I don't hold that against Mr. Amash. I actually respect him for sticking to his free market, pro-liberty, pro-limited government, let's interpret the Constitution as it's written position against what has happened in the Republican Party, particularly in the last few years. It has moved away from those positions. At what point why should someone be bound to stick with that party just because sometimes in the past it was closer to a free market and limited government position than is the Democratic Party? He made a judgment, and one that I think is defensible, that the Republican Party no longer stands for those principles. And I hope he wins re-election. I hope he runs again for his seat. If he doesn't, I applaud him for sticking to his principles.
What do the parties represent now? I'm referencing your letter, your response to Henry Olson, where you say the philosophy of both is to that the state should be constrained by little more than the need to assemble majoritarian coalitions, however fleeting, in its effort to bestow privileges on favored groups at the expense of demonized ones.
You sound like Frederick Douglass in that letter. It's actually quite good.
I really like that. But could you elaborate on that, Professor?
Yeah. I see nothing in the Republican Party today, the mainline Republican Party, that is true to the principles of the Constitution. They argue that, just like the Democrats do, that if we get a majority of votes, then we can pretty much do whatever the hell we want to do. Bestow tariffs on this group, give subsidies to that group. The Republican Party now is paying off farmers for the suffering that they're enduring because of tariffs given to another group. This is just majoritarian special interest politics, and the Republicans are doing it, and so a lot of Republicans are applauding it. It may be that the Democrats are even worse, but I don't think a human being is obliged to stick with always the lesser of the two evils, if even the lesser of the two evils is evil. And I think it's evil to regard the public fisc. It's evil to regard taxpayers. It's evil to regard consumers as basically a giant pocketbook to be picked if you can assemble a majoritarian coalition to do it. And the fact that the Republicans do it, in my view, makes it no more acceptable than if the Democrats do it. A lot of the things that Republicans are doing today are things that if Democrats had done them, the same Republicans that are applauding these actions would be righteously upset and critical of the Democrats. And yet, because Republicans are doing it, they're finding excuses to look past it.
Yeah, I wish there was, like the Freedom Caucus, which was mentioned by Scott Jennings in his criticism of Amash. You know, the Freedom Caucus, the Jim Jordans and the Mark Meadowses of the world, they could take more public positions on things like deficit spending and running up more debt and running up more unfunded liabilities with respect to the entitlement programs, and suggesting that rethinking and restructuring entitlements is not something that can be off the table. It's 2/3 of the federal budget. It has to be on the table, and we have to address it in a serious way at some point. I'm disappointed by the lack of sort of the diversity of opinion. If that's not something Kevin McCarthy can take up in the minority, it's not something Mitch McConnell may want to take up. But part of this is raising these issues as serious issues, so at least they're part of the national dialogue in terms of policy making. And that's sort of gone away. And I mean, who can defend, if you're a conservative, a federal government that's run up over $100 trillion in debt and unfunded liabilities? There's nothing fiscally conservative about that, and yet everybody runs around D.C. calling themselves a fiscal conservative.
That's right. That's right. And look, I understand. I think we are going to lose something with Justin Amash no longer in the Republican Party, because he was a voice of, in my view, reason in that party, and now he's removing himself from that. That is a loss. That means there'll be even less pressure within the Republican ranks to retain what little they have left of their fiscal conservatism and pro-liberty views. But a human being should have principles, and at some point, I don't care what the practical impacts are. You have to stick with your principles. You can't sell your soul too cheaply. And I think that Justin Amash felt that to stick within the Republican Party required him to sell his soul at a price that was not worthwhile. And I admire him for refusing to make that bargain.
He is Don Boudreaux. He's an American economist. He's author, professor, co-director of the program in the American Economy and Globalization at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. And again, you can always catch his musings, commentary at cafehayek.com. Don, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And you join us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're talking about it, Dan and Amy are talking about it. It's Chicago's Morning Answer.